Good afternoon. Ke Betutai Kayadruba. And thank you for joining us for this special event in honor of Two-Spirit Indigenous and First Nation relatives here on Turtle Island. Ke aku ne Neputitiwa Lisa ne Yanaguana Nupukiakama. Yo soy de la tierra de Yanaguana, now known as San Antonio, Texas. Tama ne Tepu ne Pukiakama. I am Lisa Marquez Bouchon. My pronouns are she, her, ella, ia. I'm a direct descendant of the Wirrarica tribe, raised by my Wirrarica grandmother, Nekutsi, and mother, who are from Tepic, Nayarit. I will be moderating this event with my colleague, Michael Dunbar-Rodney, and our technology will be handled by our very own web expert, Morgan Yoshimura. May we begin this heartfelt conversation as an offering to our Two-Spirit and Indigi-queer elders and ancestors who paved the way before us, and to all my relations, your queerness is sacred and your knowledge is a powerful gift to us all, and I thank you for being here. I will hand over the mic to Michael now, and let's begin the session.
Thank you very much, Lisa. My name is Michael, pronouns he, him. I'm a librarian at the Central Library downtown, and I'm honored to be a part of today's panel, which is a discussion in honor of our First Nation knowledge keepers, who will be discussing what it means to be Two-Spirit, and how this identity influences their language and traditions. And I will go ahead and allow them to introduce themselves to you today. Anwa, if you wouldn't mind starting.
Ti manam sin anu naha ulhu sin Yanaguana akwe naham sin tamox ashte tawahayo nametuchem naptu nakaletsam nami Dai Diana Garcia nami Hanai Julian Reyes Jr. Good day. My people call me Anua. My people come from Medicine River. My tribe, Water Bird. My name is Anua, and I'm a Two-Spirit person from Yanaguana. My ancestors are from these lands and northern Mexico. My pronouns are they, them, theirs. I'm a part of this conversation today because I think that San Antonio Public Library has done a really conscious job of including the Indigenous Two-Spirit kin of these particular lands. And I've been invited to have a conversation on those things. I think I'm also here because of the foreground that my ancestors laid in terms of the buildings and foundations that not only San Antonio was built upon, but San Antonio Public Library as well. So I'm grateful for those things. To all my relations, thank you.
Dagote, She Libre Gonce, Shimani, Kathy Johns, Ine Inda, Virginia Yu, Dagoline, Shita, J.R. Rocha, Ine Lipanes, Aina Coateco, Aina Mexica, Chike, Dagoline, Texas U, Jo Gojo. My family's been in Texas for a very, very, very long time. My family is Lipan-Apache, Coateco, and Mexica, a blend of many different things, as most of us are in South Texas and northern Mexico. My family extends into Nuevo Leon, just over the border. I'm a Two-Spirit person who lives here in Austin, Texas. I'm the Deputy Director of the Indigenous Peyote Conservation Initiative in South Texas. So I work with the medicine and protecting that for future generations as well. I am happy to be here today and happy to share the things that I know and answer any questions.
Hi, my name is Red Mari, a Rebel Mariposa. Some people know me. I'm here in Yanaguana in what is now called San Antonio, Texas. I'm like Libre. I've also have a lineage of family that have been in Texas for many generations, as well as Mexico, and some ancestors that kind of on the boat through the Gulf of Mexico into Mexico. So a mix. I'm on this panel. Oh, my pronouns are she, they, and I chose to be on this panel because I got to work with Lisa Reese on a workshop, and I really enjoyed her energy and the respect that she was trying to bring to Indigenous communities and cultures, and educate folks, and she wanted to put this panel together, and I said, yeah, let's do it. If you want to be a part of it, I'm happy to. If you just want me to promote it, whatever you need, let me know. And here we are. It's come to fruition, and we're here live, and I'm excited to be here with the other panelists to learn more about them as well. And I think I'm just here on this panel to share a little bit of my experience and knowledge of being walking in an Indigenous way, and also being raised by Two-Spirit elders from Turtle Island.
Well, thank you all so much. We really appreciate you being willing to share your knowledge and experiences with us. And now these concepts, are very new to many of us listening here today. So obviously, all of our attendees, y'all are going to have questions. Do feel free to put them in the chat, and we can convey those to the panelists. Before we do that, though, just a few ground rules regarding questions. Please go ahead, and when you enter, just start with your question, and then just a sentence or two for context if necessary. Just try to keep it concise. Please say if you are asking the question towards a specific panelist or if it's towards all panelists. And finally, do keep the questions to the topic of the panel. Please no intrusive personal questions for our panelists or staff, or questions regarding matters not related to the topic at hand. But otherwise, please just post them in the chat, and we'll get them conveyed. And now, to start off the discussion, I do have a question for all the panelists, and it is this. How do you define Two-Spirit, and is there a difference between what may be considered the modern definition and the historical definition? Oh, also, feel free to just hop in. Sorry, it can be hard on these online platforms.
Yeah, I'll start shortly. I mean, I think it's an interesting question, right? I think, because we think about traditionally, and, what does that look like? And from my experience, a lot of Two-Spirit history was not recorded, was erased. I mean, the elders I grew up with, they had to create their own sun dances in order to still be out and be part of the tribes, and ceremonially, because they sometimes were banished from doing things when they were out. And so from the stuff that I know as far as that identity, it's like a lot of knowledge, I think, is also like sacredly held and passed down orally. So I think traditionally, what does it mean now versus what does it mean then? I mean, I think it's pretty simple. I mean, similar, but I also think that it's not meant to have to stay the same. So let me see. I don't know if I'm asked completely if they're different. So I guess so. I would say that, a Two-Spirit elder grandmother of mine who was White Mountain Apache would, saw the Two-Spirit young and sedate, it would definitely be different, but I think that she would welcome it as well, knowing that is part of how we grow as peoples, and we're adjusting with the time. And as long as you're holding on to certain things that are true to the ceremony and to the way of life, and other things kind of shift a little bit, and that is okay.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for sharing. Libre?
I guess, the thing that I think most stands out to me when you hear the word Two-Spirit is spirit. And I think that's the one major difference that sets the word Two-Spirit apart from other things, is that it's the connection to spirit, to ceremony, to prayer, to those different ways. So it's not a sexual identity. It has nothing to do about who you love or don't love. It is a spiritual identity. And so through that lens, you don't even have to be gay identifying to identify as Two-Spirit. As long as you are nurturing those two spirits, the omateo, the duality, the masculine, the feminine, the death, the life, you're paying equal balance to the two, then you are walking in those two spirit ways.
I think sometimes people have a little bit issue with Two-Spirit and its contemporary creation, and thinking, or if they research the history, that this was a term created in the 70s. I think it might have been with AIM up near Minnesota, I'm not sure, from a conference. And so then people will be like, well, this is a contemporary term that's created. But what it was a term of liberation that was created for Native folks who had not necessarily like sometimes in cultures there's like a pan-indigenous, construct. Like maybe if we're talking about 4 directions, although other people have 6 directions or more, sometimes these things still stay the same and have connection. And so it was like that with the term Two-Spirit. There was a bunch of queer Native folks who wanted to create this term to kind of understand their own transness, their own, queerness. And so then as an effort of liberation, I believe this term Two-Spirit was created. Now, in the past, in my opinion, I think, our past ancestors would look upon this term, look on our liberation. I mean, maybe they'd have critiques, but I'm sure in general they'd be very, very proud of us. And so that's the way that I look at it now, is that our ancestors were clearly trans Two-Spirit peoples, that didn't fit in the cisgendered understanding. And oftentimes as well, a lot of those peoples had a particular roles, whether they be, related to sacred activities or other activities, but they had particular roles that were delineated from the roles of male and female. And so for me, the conversation of being Two-Spirit is reconnecting with that past, understanding the contemporary that we exist in now, and perpetuating Native futures, and particularly Native trans and queer futures.
I just want to add a little bit. I love what Lyra and Anua said, and I think what I was taught was that oftentimes a Two-Spirit person would be identified as a child. They could see that. The elders, the grandmothers could identify that, and it didn't necessarily have to do with anything of who you loved, right? As well, because also back then that wasn't important. They weren't really gendering people and putting people in boxes, and so there was so much fluidity. But it was definitely something, because like Libra was saying, that it is an attachment to spirit, and it means some people think about it as being like femme and masculine, but it's also about being in this world and in the other world as well. And so that was something that the elder grandmothers could identify at birth. And so then you were often taken and raised by the grandmothers, because they knew that you were Two-Spirited, and you were to be raised in a certain way and kept as a sacred being, and to help guide the tribe and the community move forward in a good way.
Oh, that's actually fascinating to hear, Rebel. And so in light of that, I do have a question for you all then, that brought to mind. So how did y'all find your way to this identity, and what are some of the ways you've seen this journey taken? Because I'm guessing something so nuanced, there are kind of multiple ways you've seen people come to this, or you may have come to this, if you're comfortable sharing.
I guess I can start. I would say for me, someone who's walked in queer community, the general queer community for a while, I have not, I understand the struggles that our trans brothers and sisters face every day, and I have not considered myself trans because of the privilege that I have walking through the world with masculine presentation most of the time. And so Two-Spirit was something that to me sounded more trans identified. And so I, starting this journey with my own Two-Spirit identity, had to understand that it is not taking up that space that exists already in queer community. It's its own separate identity, a spiritual identity within indigenous communities of North America and South America and Central America. And so that caveat, having to learn and unlearn that some identities and some things do have different hats and different ways they present, and that they exist in different communities in different ways and in different levels. So I think like having to come to terms with, okay, I can identify as Two-Spirit without taking up someone else's space or speaking for someone else or taking someone else's voice away, because it is the voice that I walk in. And I think that's kind of how I've like made my own journey.
So I can speak a little bit on this too. I think essentially for me, transness and two-spiritness is liberation, And the reason why I particularly align with this in general is because my growing up, as it is the relationship for many Native and queer trans folk, is a connection to religion. And when I was growing up, being a part of a more Pentecostal, Southern Baptist, all these different variations of Christianity, there was a way in which it inhibited, my consciousness, like a type of ontological sovereignty that was imposed upon my thinking, to where I could not even conceive of or think of particular ways of being, although I may have had queer folks around me, elders, and all the like. For me to think about Two-Spirit was not a conceptualization I could engage with because of this type of religion and oppression that was attached to me. And so then as I began to get older and had more freedom in who I could be, how I could express myself, then started to become educated on the ways in which masculinity and the patriarchy are so oftentimes like negatively oppressing particular peoples. It became this sense of like liberation and reconnection with my ancestors, and a way in which I could, just think of that like unveiling of thought, like, oh, I can be free, right? Like I can be liberated. I can transcend the structures that not only harm my, kin, but also deeply harm the way that I express myself, the way that I understand myself, the way that I conceive and consume of the world. And so for me, that's really, essentially what began to occur is I started reading, and I remember because I got my master's and my bachelor's from the University of Hawaii, and one of my professors there, Jamaica Osario, she writes this book called Remembering Our Intimacies. And in this book, she's talking about queer Kanaka Maoli relationships, and how those relationships like lead us to responsibility through reciprocity and connection to the earth. And I remember she said this thing, and she said, the gender binary is a colonial construct. And then that would just stick in my head for so long. It's a colonial construct. And then she followed it up and she said, if the gender binary is a colonial construct, then therefore it's unnatural. And then I was like, man, then the mode for some of us of existence and way of being, and the most natural way of being, derived from the earth, because the earth itself is queer, is being and being connected to two spirits in a particular way, and being this thing that I've always felt this calling towards. And so for me, that type of liberation, education, connection, all wove into this beautiful tapestry of queerness for me.
Awesome.
Yes. Anua's answer reminded me of like the first question about the different, how we different between modern and traditional. And I think traditionally, or in the old ways in the past, you wouldn't know it. That term didn't exist, like Anu had brought up. And so you also would have been identified probably from the community as a child. But now we self-identify with this term. And so, yes, we come to it in different ways. And I think for me, it's been a lineage thing. It's been that I have two-spirited, mothers, and I've been raised by, two-spirited grandmothers and other elders. So that's how I've come to it, and understand it very similar in the way in which Libre and Anu are also understanding it. I'm like nodding my head in agreement. I'm like, yes, it feels very much that way as well, like liberation, and the fluidity of it is really important for me to also use that term, even if so I don't know how everyone's always going to interpret it. Whenever I say that I'm two-spirited, I know that someone might never have heard of it, and they might think of it one way, and I might be thinking of it another way, but it's still something about kind of reclaiming that energy back and saying, this is for us, and this is something that that I want to continue to make sure that stays alive, and to honor my ancestors, and to honor the land.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you for sharing that. And in fact, Rebel, that kind of leads me to another question, actually, I'd like y'all to discuss. And it's this. So clearly, a lot of us who are not part of the Indigenous community sometimes forget that it's not a monolith. It has like so many diverse cultures, so many practices, so many ways of being. So when you are communicating this, how do you get it across to other people, or other people of other nations who may not have this exact concept within their lexicon? Is there a way you able to communicate that?
It's been my experience that almost every Indigenous culture has some sort of form of way of kind of identifying this way of in their communities. So it's just kind of learning different ways and terms and symbols.
Yeah, with me, and I'm not trying to be particularly harsh in this statement, but I would like if communities that sometimes don't have an attachment to this would really maybe consider the impacts of intercolonization on the way in which they view the world post, colonization. And which is to say, like, I agree with what Rebel's saying. Is I think that a lot of communities historically have had two-spirit kin and even have had words and have had places for them. But what you see now is one, an association with state at time. And many scholars talk about the way in which the colonial state desires to impose gender upon Native folks, to make them adhere towards their governmental structures, right? Either marrying king and queen so that they can then force that indoctrination on them, and then disperse land only to males, and removing matriarchies, right? All of this is a part of the colonial indoctrination. And so then that's why, if there are contemporary cultures that state, oh, we never have two-spirit and we haven't had them, we don't have queer folks, I would really want them to question and think about those conversations, because I think that there is a very close connection to, intercolonization. At least, that's what I would think. And hey, I could be wrong on that. I'm sure that there's some communities that just absolutely don't have those relationships. But when you're talking, one of the things that I was reflecting on is, like, we've lost words, right? Like, I use two-spirit now, but why? And it's because for some of us, Huahuitecans in particular, we don't have the word that was there. And I know that there was a word there. One, because our kin Karankawa, they have a word for queer two-spirit people. It's like Managuaya. And then two, there's several Spanish accounts. So one of them is from Cabeza de Vaca, and he says, during that time, obviously he's going to say something stupid. He said, I spent time with these people and I saw one devilish thing. Devilish. And that was a man married to another man. These are impotent, effeminate men, and they go about covered like women, and they perform the task of women. They shoot with a bow and they carry an arrow. But within that same conversation, he goes on to state that, and they were very strong, so strong that we had them take care of the livestock, and they would watch the livestock because of their strength. And so it's like, from his Spanish view, he's calling them weak and effeminate, but then it's like they have a role of particular power within their own community, which is to say, in my opinion, analyzing that text, two-spirit people have always been, in particular ways, more powerful and stronger. So.
One of the things that comes to my mind in this is, I don't know how many people are different. There are different knowledges in different ways, but when you put up a teepee, there are 3 poles, and I've always been told that is the 2 poles that are together are the masculine and the feminine pole. They are bound together by society to perpetuate children and society. And the second pole that goes this way is your two-spirit pole. And those are your 3 pillars of community. And everything else, every other pole, stands on those those three poles. And so you cannot put up a teepee with two poles, it'll just fall over. You have to have those three. And what that third pole is, which is your two-spirit pole, is your door pole. And that pole is your communication, it's your portal. It's a thing you go into when communication is broken down between the masculine and the feminine, or between different people. The two-spirit folks were the ones who would go between the intermediaries, the communicators, the matchmakers, those people who worked it out, because we see both sides of things. And I think that is, you can't put a TP up without the three poles, and therefore you can't deny we've existed, because it's one of the three primary parts of society. So as Anua said, like, post-colonization, and most of the people who are elders now, all of the people who are elders now in society have gone through that colonization in a way that's been very harmful to society. And even in our ceremonies, there's Jesus in all of the ceremonies, and Jesus didn't arrive in North America until, the 1500s. So even those things are changed and bastardized, I guess, in a way, by the pure way they used to be, by changes of colonization.
I'm so grateful for that statement. I just want to say Nakaletsam, because being a contemporary two-spirit person, it's very hard at times to confront these issues of colonization within our own folks. And then when you bring to the point your stories, this three pose, you can just in ceremony be like, y'all could exclude us, but look at these three pose. What do y'all know about, being two-spirits? I'm really just grateful for that.
And out of curiosity, Rebel and Anua, had you heard the three pole analogy before?
No, I had not been aware or heard of that. And obviously we engage in some of the same ceremonies, and we use TP for our ceremonies. And there's very much as Libre was saying, a way in which it's genderized at times. Like men do these things, women do these things, and then you're looking around as a two-spirit person and being like, well, what do we do? Where are we involved in the conversation? And understanding that that's an essential component that's no longer, a part of those ceremonies. And then also, well, why? And at times there's a particular relationship between the federal government and the way in which we have to perform ceremonies.
Well, thank you so much for sharing that. We actually have our first question coming in, and this is for everyone on the panel from Hannah. They say, we're learning about sovereignty in our social work course. I just wanted to ask if anyone's nation's sovereignty influences the kind of support or recognition available to two-spirit individuals, either positively or negatively.
If I can, I'm sorry. On sovereignty, one of the things that I've begun to learn is that our conceptualization of sovereignty is often associated and connected to Westphalian sovereignty. And it's like a European conceptualization of sovereignty, which is to say that I can violently control my lands, and I can prevent them from violently being controlled. And there's a particular relationship between militaristic control and prevention of military control on a particular land. Now, I would say that there's a completely different understanding of what sovereignty is for Indigenous folks. And referring again to my Kanaka, kin, Osario demonstrates, I think, the saying, and I'm hopefully I'm not getting this wrong, right? Is Ea, and right, and so Ea, the Ea of fish is water. The Ea of land is people. The Ea of people is air. And so, in my understanding, what Osario is trying to demonstrate is that there are these vast reciprocities that connect us that are the complete demonstration of sovereignty, which is to say, I cannot exist without land. Land exists with and through me. I cannot exist without air. Air lives and exists through me. And that those ties of reciprocity, of love and care, are much more powerful and have sustained us for so much more longer times than the violent control to overpower or dominate or express ourselves through those ways. And so that I would say that when we're discussing sovereignty, that I just want to demonstrate first and foremost that sovereignty for Native folks is a completely different thing, at least in my opinion, than sovereignty for European settler colonial mechanisms. Yeah.
Okay. Okay, thank you for sharing that. Language is such a fascinating thing. And um, when we started the panel, you all spoke of how you came to Two-Spirit, and I it felt it was very similar, but it felt like it had different aspects from each of you. Anua, you were talking about self-realization and finding yourself. Rebel, you were raised by Two-Spirit, uh, and Libre, it was also self-realization, but you were also talking about integrating that within, the queer community and figuring out how those spaces fit together. So I think my question is, like, for each of you coming through these experiences, did it change your language or open you up to aspects of language you hadn't considered before? Because feelings can run deeper in words, but the way we express those um, takes words. So I'm curious how this has influenced the language you use, what the language you explore. And I'm going to go ahead and be silent. Let y'all think about that.
I guess the first thing that comes to my mind is what language is, and that's a communication between two people, and it's a communication between a group, it's a communication between a family, and so when we choose words and we choose language and we make our own words up and we make our own slang up and we hang out with each other, we all sound alike and we all talk alike, and that's just that the relation, the family, that connection. And I think when we choose words as a collective or as a group and we make these discussions together, we are engaging in that reciprocity. We're engaging in that mutual care, that mutual aid, and building family relationships and ties across intertribal communities as well.
I think for me, the way it shifted more of more than my language. I would say it shifted my perspective, because when you're for me, I grew up in these two-spirited spaces, so two-spirited ceremonies where it was only what we might say femme people, right? And they would do everything from the fire keeping to the building of the lodges to everything. And in current colonial time, you don't see that, right? You often see very gendered spaces of masculine men building, women keep food and things like that. And so for me, it shifted just how my brain was wiring itself. And then also, yeah, I guess, and ultimately language, because I stopped really using a lot of masculine, he's, or, assuming it was a man who did things right first. So it was like, really shifted that for me. And so it ultimately shifted the language, but it was more about seeing it first and just experiencing it in such a, at that time, such a dichotomy of you just didn't see that, in the 90s. So yeah, I'm going to end with that.
So one of the things that I work specifically in cultural reclamation for my tribal community. And my master's thesis is on Kwawithecan linguistic praxis of reclamation. And my future goals for my PhD are to understand kinship linguistically, but to restore kinship through understanding, hey, like Karankawa, Kataname, Carrizo, Pahalate, they're related in a particular way, and they're related in a particular way because of long existing histories of kinship. And so then, as it pertains to this particular conversation, one of the first things that I was really enthralled about was how Karankawa had a term for two-spirit kin, which is definitively demonstrating we have always had two-spirit people. But then what that demonstrates is that Pahalate doesn't have a term. And so we're left with the weight of what happened to this term and why we don't have it. The reason we don't probably have it is because it was no of concern to the Spanish people who were writing our texts and are writing our dictionaries to write that thing down. So then that leaves me with two things, which is one, I have to create a new term, and or as a community we do, or I have to do the work to unveil the term that was pre-existent before. And so for me, a lot of my work comes from exactly those tensions with dealing with the contemporary realities of like erasure and assimilation, and the work that must be done to transcend those materialist and also spiritual impositions that are held on us. And, you know, on one level, it's terrible, you know. On the other level, it's an opportunity to really radically transform my community, to transform Yanaguana, you know, to transform our other places, to be like, hey, this could probably possibly be the word that we used to have, you know, because we too know that Two-Spirit people were completely a part of Cohuitecos and Cohuitecan culture.
Okay.
Thank you for bringing that up, because I was thinking about my own family when I was talking to my tío the other day, and he was telling me the different languages that were spoken in the household. And so, you know, we have Nayari because my great grandmother was Cora, and then my great grandfather was Wirarica, which most people call us Huichol, which is technically a derogatory term. And so we were going through it like, so you were speaking 3 different languages because they're communicating with each other, right? And so you think about that they're so connected, because you said a word earlier. I think it was ia, right? Anua?
Oh, for queer, for Two-Spirit, it's a Karankawa word. It's like managuaya, something like that.
Earlier, I thought I heard a word that said ia. For us, ia means her, and for him, it's muku, which is like really interesting, but I can't find a word for them as of now, as far as like pronouns go. All I can find is tama, which means nosotros, basically, or us. So it's like, it's interesting how language is interchangeable, because in the peak, there's 2 to 3 different tribes that reside there. So you have the Cora and you have the Wirarica. So there's those languages that are very connected. And when Libre was talking about the teepee, we don't use teepees in our ceremonies, right? We don't have teepees. But the mezcal is the same, right? When you're building it, they all work together. All of the branches, and it has to be the same length and all of those things. So I just really am learning from this conversation from all 3 of you, and the connection that I'm finding. So thank you so much. But as we talk about this Two-Spirit liberation and how I feel like we're reclaiming things, because here in Yanaguana and San Antonio, not many people have heard of the term Two-Spirit still. And not many people know our history here in this region. So how do you feel like each of you are reclaiming your history? That's my question.
I have a piece of art here on the wall on the other side from one of our Karankawa relatives, and it says, "Our existence is resistance." And I think that seeing that every day, you know, it reminds me that just, you know, putting on a medicine bag and walking out this door is an act of resistance. It's an act of claiming who you are. It is also standing in your truth and, you know, taking up rightful space where you should.
For me, you know, I'm mostly known doing it through food, and you know, through reclaiming different recipes or showing people native ingredients, and having people get reintroduced to different ways of eating. Personally, I recently had a baby, and I chose to have a home birth because I wanted to reclaim that ceremony and reclaim, you know, that kind of powerful moment happening in our homes. away from medical systems, westernized medical systems. And I also, I do danza azteca. I'm a danzante, and so I carry the dance and the song and the drum as well. And so those are the ways that I, continue to reclaim or find joy as well in it, right? And spread it and share it and create safer spaces for folks as well to see that, because some of these spaces can still be, seem really heteronormative or heterodominated. And so if I can show up on a space and be cooking and show up as an Indigenous queer person, then hopefully it can inspire someone else. And same thing as being a danzante, or even being, somebody choosing home birth and reclaiming that ceremony. I try to live my life in a way that can inspire others to feel safer and more empowered, even if it's just a couple of people.
Yeah, I wanted to add on to what Lisa was saying earlier. Is, if there had never been historical evidence of Two-Spirit people, I would say that we still have a mandate to make our ceremonies for Two-Spirit folks, to include trans and queer community members. And people would then question, well, how are you valid in changing ceremonial aspects? By what authority do you have to do this? You're desecrating things. And one of the texts that I really like as it pertains to this particular conversation is Everything Ancient Was Once New by Case. In this text, they're talking about Hawaiians as well. And when the Kanaka Maoli first arrived to their lands, they're encountered and bringing their past and encountering new lands, and they're understanding the sacred, right? If we lose sight of the sacred for the ceremonial, then we're damaging and destroying something. Our ancestors created us to perpetuate the sacred, not to perpetuate necessarily the ceremonial, though we'll carry the ceremonial with us to guide us in the future. But the sacred is the most essential component. And if in our contemporary existence we see Two-Spirit kin not having ever been aware of them historically, part of maintaining and perpetuating the sacred is including them into the ceremonial. And we are valid in doing that because each song is changed by us simply singing it. And we're given a reciprocitative responsibility within that. When we're taught a song, our singing changes it because it's being sung by our voice and not necessarily the elder who taught it to us. And I really want Native people to understand that there's this concept of essentialism within our cultures, which states that pre-1492 was the most Native we're ever going to be. But thinking about things from the perspective of Indigenous future states, we in our contemporary existence perpetuate what it means to be Coahuiltecans, to be Apache, to be all these tribal communities, that we have a responsibility in ourselves to navigate these futures contemporarily and to be guided by our ancestors. But we have to create new ways, because that's just the way that that this path is, and the way that it goes. And so as it pertains to those, conversations of Two-Spirit and reclamation, I would say that being and praying and connecting to Pahi, the medicine that a lot of us here in this very group are familiar with, letting it guide me, continuing to question, right? All and so many things do need to be questioned. And we need to do that with patience and kindness, and also big ears to listen. And so I would say that in our circles, that we would pray for elders that would have the ability to be like, I don't know, maybe I think you're kind of wrong on that. And also have the ears to be listening to us when we're saying like, I don't know, elder, maybe I think you're a little wrong on that and we should think about those things. But being in that position, right, is where I think the work is done. Of like, man, I think women should be able to do drums. And then elder being like, well, this and that, and just having that place where we're engaging and also loving and being patient to others and our kin. I think, what is it, Angela Davis said this thing, that we're not given school revolutionaries. Like, we're not getting people from straight revolutionary school to then enact the most theoretical and profound, revolution. Like, we are given our kin who are profound in their each and individual ways, and we need to like work in a better way and learn how to work in a better way with them to transcend collectively. So
Go ahead, Libre.
I can't speak about anything that I don't know, and I can't speak about things that are outside of my own community. But as an Athabascan person, we extend all the way up from Alaska to Mexico. And we share a language, we share a family with the Dene, many other communities of Apache people, all up to Alaska. And in Navajo, there is a word, Nadlehi, that means two-spirit person. And that, that whole chunk of the map of America is a huge section that includes those Athabascan languages. So words for two-spirit people still exist in those languages, and they have always existed. There's also a word for a masculine, a feminine, a feminine, a masculine, feminine. So there's unique words because we all exist and we always have existed, in society across all cultures. There's about a 10% chance you'll be, queer, just by the luck of the draw, as I call it. But yeah, I mean, language and community and all those things have always had us present. And it's just whether the current colonial constructs have allowed those things to survive, or if it strangled them off to the point where people say now they didn't exist. And the other thing about that I think about, as far as like things I've learned from elders and different elders, I met a Comanche woman named Mary, and she was telling us how in the Namana way they believe there's a time and a place for everything and every ceremony and every song. And sometimes that time is ended for those ways or ceremonies or songs, and that it's now time to create a new song and a new ceremony and a new medicine wheel, because the times have changed or things are different, and therefore the medicine needs to change, or the ceremony needs to change, or like how we interact with those needs to evolve as we are evolving beings as well.
Thank you. Thank you. That's fantastic. I have a question. Give me a moment because it's going to take a little bit for me to formulate it. But Anua, you mentioned the sacred versus just the ceremony or the ritual, and one of the things I find really interesting about Two-Spirit is it is as it says, a spiritual thing. It has a spiritual component to it. That when I think just of queer identities, I usually think of more like earthier connotation, pretty material. So I'm wondering how, if you all are comfortable sharing, how you see that sacredness can sometimes inform queerness and vice versa, or if you've seen that, because that's not necessarily something a lot of us have seen necessarily in the queer community in general. Like there are plenty of spiritual practices, but I don't know how many people would look at even just themselves and especially their queerness and be like, yes, this is something sacred.
I think, relating to Libre's comments earlier, in cultures, there's sometimes roles, right? Like for us, in our culture, there's a relationship between death and women being death doulas. And then in more contemporary times, there was a relationship between, NAGPRA reburials and aspects that men could do and aspects that women could do. So then you can kind of infer and understand that like two-spirit people are occupying the transition in both of these places, and that there's a sacred aspect there of like between living, death, engaged in, whether it be reburials or now I don't want to state that a gender is better than the other. I would say that there are some ways in which masculine genders are sacred, women genders are sacred. I would also say that what I'm having a particular conversation with is that two-spirit communities are, because of our structures, not considered sacred, and that we are stating we are sacred, we are sacred, we are sacred, in rebuttal to a constant and continual discrimination, lateral violences, all types of subvert and overt violences that are occurring. And that in the same way, masculinities exist in a type of power dynamic. And so that discussing masculinities isn't necessarily saying that there's not sacred men, but it's saying that look and be aware of the institutional structures that exist and how we have to confront those things and how you have responsibility to confront those things. And so that's kind of some things that I'm also thinking about and thinking about while you were talking.
All right. Thank you. Thank you for sharing that. So I also want to, and you've covered some of this in the previous topics, but I just want to check if there's anything y'all haven't said. Like, are there nuances to being Two-Spirit that you would want, the broader community to be aware of? Just some of the maybe, finer points or finer ideas, if you haven't spoken on them already, that kind of differentiate Two-Spirit from maybe just, I think a lot of times people equate Two-Spirit with queer, and it's you've helped pretty much establish that it isn't exactly the same thing. But again, are there any like nuances that you would like people to know or keep in mind?
I think, the thing that I'm thinking about is how we have to water both of those at the same time. Like, you have to water your masculine and your feminine side. If you're not watering one and you're starving the other, then you're not actually walking in a balanced harmony with both of your spirits. And I think we all carry two spirits within us, but do everyone engage with those two spirits is a different metric for identification. And I think the thing that keeps coming back is spirit. So prayer, ceremony, sweats, all these things that bring us together, and how our roles have traditionally been medicine people and matchmakers and intermediaries and warriors and all of these different complex dualities, and honoring both of those dualities and the Omateo and the Mexica way, like that not in a binary way, but in a sacred way.
Yes, I think, what Libre was saying about, it being tied to spirit, I think I agree that each of us as land-based people carry, a duality of femme and masculine, as we call it now. And but I think that there is that element of spirit that is tied in, that makes the nuance of someone who's a little bit more connected, a little bit more tied in, dialed in, to say. And so they end up being the spirit workers. Like I know I was saying, the death doulas and the midwives, and the water keepers, fire keepers, and oftentimes it just happens to be that a lot of those people who are dialed into spirit are would identify as queer or gay or a lesbian, because there is just something that is there, and I think that's why it kind of gets tied into it. And I think that's okay. I think that if that kind of understanding of maybe that's a certain element that is tied into it a little bit, not always in every scenario, but more often than not, it is a component. And so, yeah, I think that's an important thing to think about, is the spirit aspect of it, and not just, the mask and the femme, and just, honoring that when you walk in that way, it makes you more empathetic. It makes you have more experience. And so having empathy is a way of having spirit, of being spiritual, and to be able to teaches you how to treat other people, and not just people, but animals and trees and plant, all of that differently, because you feel it differently, you walk it differently, and you don't get the privilege of not being able to. To walk, I am very femme presenting, but I have a wife. I don't know what it's like to, walk around this city in a hetero privileged, way. I have, so guess what? When I see another queer couple, I have a different connection to them, and I want to keep them safe. And so I guess the last thing I want to say in case we're wrapping it up is I think that if you know someone in your community who identifies as Two-Spirit or wants to or is curious about it, nurture them a little bit and protect them at all costs.
Yeah, I would like to chime in a little bit too on terms. Just this is my particular thoughts and understanding. I'm sure people can agree or disagree, but I really feel that it's important to recognize the term Two-Spirit and it being for particularly Native folk, detribalized folk, Indigenous people. This is not a term that's for other people. It's a term that was made for us, by us, as attached to our culture, and it is liberatory towards us and the particular relationship that we have in the world, that we have to navigate, that we're confronted with. And other folks, if they're having these conversations, can think about terms like non-binary, gender non-conforming, all of this stuff. But for Native peoples in particular, Two-Spirit is for us. The other thing that I would say is, because we were talking a little bit about terms, and I don't think anyone should use this term. I'm using this term because I'm part of this community that's affected by it. And it was a term that was applied to our people, is that the Spanish did create a term recognizing that we've always been there, which is the term verdache. I think that this is a derogatory term, in my opinion. But it also, if you go and you read and you research, you'll see this term continually used over and over again. And I'm pretty sure it even comes from, Arabic communities. And so then it just points to the fact that when Spaniards came here, they created and had words for the folk that were us, that already existed in these lands. Yeah.
Thank
Yeah,
you.
to touch on that point, I was reading some archives in at the Huichol Research Center. They call themselves the Huichol Research Center, and even though it's a derogatory term, I'm like, okay, like get it together. But they have you know, some archives there, and it talks about like the first Spaniard that came across us in 1563 or something, and they called us Gawaches or something, which turned into Huichols, which actually is like Huarache, which is actually dirty sandal, if you think about it. And it goes on and how the language has changed, and it's like, okay, and you really have to read in between the lines when you're getting your master's and you're doing your thesis, and you decide to get your PhD, or anyone that's going that route. It's like when you're reading these documents, you're like, okay, bro. Or it's hard, but it really shows you something, and that's why it's important that we speak to our elders, that we talk to our grandmothers and grandfathers and tios and tias and all of those people, because they have our true story, and our true language. And so I just wanted to kind of touch base on that, because it's relatable to all of us. And when we're talking about the next generation, I think my question is for each of you is, what would you say to a queer Indigenous youth or Two-Spirit youth? Like, how can we raise the next generation of leaders? What would you do? What are you doing?
I think first recognizing those people in our own circles, in our own community, and nurturing them, I think is, what we all need, extra care. And, as Two-Spirit people, we are doing shadow work all day long, and that is healer work, and that is laborsome on your mind, it's laborsome on your soul, it's laborsome on your heart. And so as these more tuned in beings, we have our antennas all the way out, and we're picking up all of both this and that at the same time. And I think, being aware of how that affects us as individuals, and knowing that that's going to keep perpetuating in the future, being living in a way and walking in a way that helps it be an easier process for the next generation, and bringing them along, inviting them to ceremony, invite them to the sweat lodge, invite them to the temescal, like, say, hey, we're going to go on this hike, and let's just be out in nature together, and let's talk about these things, and let's share a little language, and let's share community. We're the culture bearers, we're the future elders as well. And, those roles are fast changing as people get older, and the elders are always leaving us, and so there's a need to nurture that next generation and nurture the younger queers and two-spirits in our communities.
Yeah, I Libra said a lot of what I would say already, but yeah, you're just, you're, if you can, what they quote unquote take them under your wing in a way. Just allow them to have. Sometimes you just need someone to talk to, someone that is relatable. Maybe you're the only one that they know that identifies that way, or maybe you just kind of look a little bit more like them, so they're more inclined to listen to you and talk to you. I think often just with my own child now, just like raising them in a way that is as decolonized as possible, right? And really being aware of that and these subtleties of how those kind of certain ways that are not indigenous ways that get into our psyche, and how can I protect and nurture this young being, and how can I have other parents perhaps that want to do that as well. And I work with younger queer people who I cook with and work in an organization with, and I try to encourage them as much as they can to use their voice, that they're valid, and it's okay if they're angry. They can be the angry queer person, and there's nothing wrong with that, and it's beautiful. And honoring their emotions and what they're feeling and thinking. And yes, they may get frustrated with elders, and that's okay. Still letting them know that it's so much to learn from elders, and they have so much to learn from them. So I think bringing that back, where we're really connecting the elders and the children together more often, is something that I try to do as well.
Yeah, some of the things that immediately come to mind, I think, we have men's healing circles, we have women's healing circles, like we need two-spirit healing circles. And maybe that's a call to us in this community right now, is like, how can we organize to develop and create those things that are accessible, that are, there for our particular people. We know the statistics that queer, two-spirit, trans folks face a massive amount of violence, and that they oftentimes, do engage in self-harm and all the terrible things that we already know. And so how can we then, confront those things? Like, how would we really confront those things if it was, people that were related to us? And of course, the other thing that's coming to my mind too is, sexual violence. How do we think about creating safety? How do we implement safety? How do we approach safety and violences? The other thing I was thinking of too as well, and this is a long time coming, it needs to already happen, is to have sweat lodges that are particularly for two-spirit people, to have peyote ceremonies that are for two-spirit people particularly, and it's like, well, what is in the way of those happening? And there are lots of things that prevent those things from happening, but those are things that we need to have if we really believe in our spiritualities, which I think a lot of us really do in this community. Then we need to make sure that we are spiritually sustaining, reaching out to, protecting, praying with, and praying for those kin of ours. And so I would think that a two-spirit, Bahi peyote ceremony would go a long way. Two-spirit sweat lodge would go a long way. Two-spirit healing circle would do so much for our people.
I can attest to the Two-Spirit Sweat Lodge really getting down and really, really, really powerful medicine and prayer that can happen. That happens in those lodges. So yes, more of those everywhere on Turtle Island.
Thank you. Otniel, I just want to say I do see your question in the chat. I do want to hold on to that until the end. I want to ask two more questions before we get to the Q&A part. One of the first ones is, what are some of the ways you feel the queer community can hold space for Two-Spirit people? In a way that is welcoming and respectful.
You know, I think as queer people, we find ourselves also social people. You know, not all of us, but in majority people are social, and I think ways to honor people that don't require a lot at all is, you know, if you're throwing an event, you know, POC, queer, Two-Spirit, Indigenous people, no cover, you know, or if you have a queer Two-Spirit person who's in your circle who you know is doing this type of work and you've got an extra $1,000, send them $50 on Venmo, you know, create equity with our money and with our social spaces for Two-Spirit people in America.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you for that. And second question I want to ask is if people are curious or if people encounter someone who is Two-Spirit or they want to know more, what is either a respectful way they can approach and ask, or what are some resources they can maybe investigate first, rather than maybe putting the teaching burden on all of you?
Yeah, I was thinking a little bit about how to address your previous question as well. And so I was thinking particularly like, well, how does the community, queer community, how does it impact us right now? And I would say sometimes, like, you know, gay communities are very just gay. Lesbian communities, I'm not too sure, but I'm sure they can be the same way. And so it's like when there's these people that like quote unquote outliers or subaltern that like are in this mixture of things, sometimes they can be a type of transphobic or two-spirit phobic towards those particular people. And so really considering it's like, how can I challenge those own things in myself, you know, or how can I, from a queer community, how can we prevent that type of discrimination towards two-spirit folks, and how can we, you know, be more inclusive? All of this, the things that we have now, which celebrate, you know, lesbian and gay people, were one time. Sometimes I feel like those things cannot get disconnected from what they faced and what those two-spirit and trans folks may be facing now, you know. And so much to what Libre was saying, you know, like including us in events, making space for us in, you know, conversations about pride and centering us, like that does a lot. You know, even when I think about drag, you know, it's like drag men, drag women, drag kings, drag queens. And sometimes like, is there space for, you know, two-spirit drag? What does that even look like? And why can we not explore those imaginings? You know, and there's a particularly important reason about why we can't imagine those things and why we haven't, or why they're just beginning to be discussed. Yeah.
I think one thing that I think can help is don't use AI because it wastes our water and water is life. And so, but you can, you know, do a search and find some things. I mean, it's hard to really find, you know, things on the internet because so much of, in my experience, so much stuff is passed down through oral tradition and just being in the spaces. But there's some stuff to at least get yourself a little acquainted with the idea of it. You know, I would say don't just get the first website, maybe look at the next and look at the 5 of them or something. Go to page 2 as well. I used to have my, yeah, so go to page 2, go down it a little bit. And then there's a podcast that's called All My Relations, and they have an episode called Indigi-queer. And it's a great episode, but I think the whole podcast is great. I think oftentimes if Two-Spirit seems new to you, then maybe, you know, other Indigenous, you know, terms and topics are also new. And if you listen to those episodes, you'll learn so much about Native folks, you know, mainly in the U.S. and what is now called the United States. So yeah, that's what I would recommend.
I will just interject here real quick. It's like another thing y'all can do is you can ask your librarians. They're like Lisa can absolutely point you in the direction. Any of us can, because I just wanted to touch on that because, as Rebel points out, it can be hard when you're just looking online if you don't necessarily know what you're looking for to validate that information. So I will say, yes, ask your librarians. All right, shameless plug done.
I know. I was going to add in that plug, so don't worry. You did it for me. I particularly work at Great Northwest Library, and I have tons of bookmarks that I have my team volunteers make with QR codes for Two-Spirit literature that we have for free, with the library card. And we have events like these, one of my main goals this year was to have more year-round Native programming, and this is one of the most important events that I wanted to do, was have this panel discussion and have this available. Because if you were to look on YouTube, there's not very many free available panels for Two-Spirit people if you were to do any research. Believe me, I've done it. So I think it's a wonderful place. Obviously, I work here. I love it. And please stop by, because I definitely curated a collection here for Two-Spirit Indigi-queer youth, and come by the library at any time and check it out. End of plug.
I just wanted to touch on one thing that doesn't seem like it has been said. You kind of touched on it a brief second, but how people who are not Indigenous have lots of questions, and the questions can be intrusive. They can be not their information or not their prerogative, and those things put us as Indigenous people in this teaching mode where we have to inform the oppressor about what's going on, and those things are our labors as well. And so, as Indigenous people, we have always been told, give first before you're taking. And so, like, if you're trying to take knowledge or take something from someone, you should be giving to that person in some way before you even think about having the conversation about, what can I take this knowledge from your people, or, from your ancestors. And so, like, making sure you're doing it in a respectful way with the people who you are in your circle, who you already know, who you're already comfortable with, who you already support, and who you already kind of water, is that safe space to ask those people. People who you don't know, people who you see on the street, probably not the person to stop and interrupt their day and ask them, hey, what's going on? Are you Two-Spirit? Like, tell me about that. Like, these people are living their lives, and we all have lives to live, and it's not everybody's day to be the educator.
Okay, so I lied. I have one more question before we get to the Q&A, and that's this: as a librarian, as me and Lisa working within the library system, aside from maybe doing more programming like this and centering Two-Spirit stories and literature, are there ways we can make it a more welcoming and a more comfortable space? Because I know there is, or at least in the queer community, I know there's this paradox of like us as a free community resource, but we are also an institution. And there is, I know that can cause discomfort, certainly within the queer community. So for you all, are there things you would see or things you would look for to be that we might be able to do to make it a more welcoming space?
First thing that comes to mind is maybe just like Indigenous or Native American story time, right? We're amazing storytellers, and so I would love to see more of that, because it's nice to hear as well. I think it's important to read the words, but also to hear the words, to hear a person, what are they, where are they accenting, and what words, how are they telling the story, and it is really helpful to really kind of understand our culture, to our identities, and to help others as well. So yeah, that's what I would say.
Yeah, I wonder, you know, like how often do we have the question of, you know, and whoever is giving a lecture, whoever's connected to San Antonio Public Library, do we say, well, how does your work relate to Native folk, you know, and Native peoples? And then in Yanaguana, how does it relate to Cohuitecos? And because I think everything has a connectionship. So many things have a connectionship to Native kin, you know, and Yanaguana as a place in Baja Late, you know, it's akin to Cohuitecos, and everyone drinks of her water, you know, and so making the space and interrogating them in a particular way of whoever you're speaking to be like, well, have you done this research? How have you, who have you reached out to? Who have you connected to with? You know, how are we including the specific kin of a particular land into the various conversations, you know, or into the various paintings, into poetry? Not necessarily, you know, to demonstrate they're lacking, but to demonstrate like these are things that you should have a conversation with or be engaged in, or thinking about. You know, I think that's probably a very important way to create safety, right? Because the issue is erasure, assimilation, violence, you know, and so then how do we engage in education that's liberatory and transcendent?
Thank you. Thank you so much for sharing that. It really is helpful. And now I do want to go into the Q&A portion of the panel. If you have questions for our panelists, please go ahead and post them in the chat. I want to start with the one from Otniel Octavio. Sorry if I've mangled that, but the question is for Anwa. I appreciate your point of view on the Two-Spirit identity being a form of liberation and reclamation. I've learned how some social constructs are toxic and imprison the mind, and it is hard to detox from and reject them. How have you liberated yourself to meet your genuine self, and are there any methods to embrace self-liberation that you would suggest to a queer community member?
I really like to, one, consider our spiritualities as valid, and there's some academics who talk about those things, you know, whether it be research of ceremony, or Kimmer with braiding sweetgrass, Smith with decolonizing methodologies. I'm sure there's so many that I'm forgetting. And so that entails two aspects. One, that education I think is very powerful. Like reading Native kin is transformative and liberation in its sense, you know. And that doesn't mean that I want to like act in an elitist way, academic way. Just to say that I think that there is much to be said about the way in a type of particular intellectualism, whether it be Native, can really impact and help our communities. And if we are dedicated towards education, that is a form of empowerment that is accessible to us, particularly by libraries, right? Like, you know, libraries are so fundamental towards our community, and reading books is transformative in a particular way. The other thing that I would say is that I want to be beyond just theoretical, right? I want to have a practice, a praxis. And so I think for me, alluding to that point that's validated by education, is that I follow the way of my ancestors, which is to say that, you know, Yanaguana is a spirit, a place with a cosmological origin for relating to the blue panther and the Ahinga bird, that it's a living kin for me. Trees are living kin for me. Sky is living kin to me, right? You know, there's another book called Speculative Relations written by Pierce, and it talks about how, like, when we look at stars and skies and realize them as kin, then the entire universe is dependent upon and created by kinships. If cosmic stars exist with us as kin, then why are we not discussing kinship if it's the fabric of everything? there's another thing to Grassi, what is his name, Neil? He talks about, like, when I look at the stars, I don't look at them and I think of them as far, because the way in which we exist as humans now is because those stars died and those elements have formed within us to create who we are contemporarily. Which is to say that when I look, once again, at tree, star, sky, Taptai, Mother Earth, that I recognize that it is a valid, conscious being that can transform the way I think, which is then to say cleaning waters, spending time with water, spending time with the trees, those are legitimate forms that lead to a transcendence, and taking care of those things is transcendence. And so when I think about liberation, I don't think about a human-centric model, but I think about a liberation that's inclusive of, Brackenridge waters, that's inclusive of Woodlawn Park, that's inclusive of the Alazan Creeks, all of these places. And so that is the way in which I get to the position of learning and towards liberation. And so what I would suggest is that if you want to learn about liberation, learn about how trees liberate themselves, learn about how land is liberatory and how sky is liberatory. And of course, like connect with the native kin folk who are doing the work. So read, touch earth, and connect with your indigenous kin, I think, are the ways in which you can get towards that liberation, right? Like, I want us to detract from an individualism towards a collectivism, towards tapestries that weave you to particular places and to peoples and to, histories and to futures. Not that it's not about exception, but it's about this connection.
I actually have a question myself to bounce off of that, and feel free for any of the panelists to answer. And I don't know if this question applies to like anyone, but if you aren't necessarily raised in these traditions, or you're coming to them and you don't have a prior history with them, would you have any advice for someone who is like, I'm not sure if these are mine? And the reason I do bring that up is so I'm Hispanic on my mother's side, but don't know as much about that side of the family. And then sometimes looking into those practices and into those traditions, not being raised in them, sometimes I wonder if I necessarily have a right to them. So if a native person who isn't necessarily raised in this tradition has that same question, what would you say to them?
Your clearance flows through your veins. If your blood is brown, you are brown. If your mother is an indigenous woman from Mexico, she's an indigenous woman from the Americas. If your parents are from Mexico, from South America, from Canada, it doesn't matter whether you know your language or not. You are an indigenous person. That blood that was shed on this land for you to exist today flows through you. Be proud, stand up, claim that.
Absolutely, I love that, and I think that for folks who are like, well, I'm not, I'm not anything. I have European descent. I have, this is something. Just keep looking back. Someone in your family was indigenous, worshiping the land, honoring it, praying on it. If you're human, you're somewhere in your lineage. There is someone, an ancestor there, and if you can reclaim your culture and honor your own culture, then it allows you to also be respect other people's cultures, right? And so we don't want people to kind of cling to someone else's culture because they want something for an identity, and they want to feel that, feel something. It's like, okay, I understand. And what are you doing to really understand where you are coming from, and to honor your own ancestors as well, whatever that past may be. Some of it sometimes is not so beautiful, right? And we think about our even more recent grandparents and great grandparents. They didn't have these great, stories of being these amazing warriors, or, they were abusive or alcoholics, or, different things like that. But keep going, keep going, keep going, keep going. And whether for sure because you have some geology report, or you just know because you're sitting like by the water and you're asking the water to talk to you, or the tree or the stars to tell you a story, trying to connect to that. I mean, those, like Anu was saying, those things, those are for all of us to connect with and to hear from and learn from. And the stories are there. They're whispering. I guarantee you their ancestors are whispering to you. And when you turn your head to listen a little bit more, it makes them real happy, so keep turning your ear to that whisper, because they're out there reaching for us.
Yeah, European peoples had an indigeneity and indigenous practices, and although I don't want to research too much, or that's not my particular call, I would say that there is a type of mandate on European descendants to look back into their indigenous ways of being and to reconnect in that particular way. That's work that they need to do, right? And as far as it regards some of your conversations on, your indigeneity, I kind of wrestled with this conversation as it pertains to Blackness, right? Like, if you do genealogies for the people that are in our lands, there's so much Blackness. There's so many Black ancestors. Mission Concepcion at one point, I believe, had a population that was 50% Black. The first person that's buried in the Alamo, Victor Blanco, was a Black soldier, followed by, or is it Juan Blanco? Then I think it's Victor Blanco, who then becomes one of the first Black governors of Texas. And so there's so much Blackness in people who think and conceive of themselves as Mexican. And so then, well, how do we, contemporary descendants of African, ancestors, connect to that Blackness? And the question changes when you think, like, my ancestors want me to connect to that. Like, I have a mandate because they're asking me to connect to that. And so, like, I can, in a conscious way, navigate and think about how do I go through those things, but I have a responsibility to remember my ancestors. And I would say that you too have a responsibility to reconnect with your indigenous folks, to reconnect, if you have Black ancestors, with those people, that they're calling to you from the other side to do that. Now, the practical of how to do that is different for different people. Like, Rebel alluded to genealogies. His Central has an incredible genealogical research area on the first floor, and you can start doing those things and reconnecting so that you know their names, right? Knowing their names. Oh, this is the indigenous, my indigenous matriarch. And let me say that indigenous women, like, carrying those things is a thing that has continually happened throughout Spanish history, and so it's rightfully so. You said it's your mother who's indigenous. I would continue to follow that line. Her grandmother, her great grandmother, and you will most likely, as someone who does and has done genealogical tribal research, find an indigenous ancestor through those lines. And so then when it comes to the tribal, right, like, you consider yourself a person who's retribalizing. Well, how do I get into these places? It's to come humbly and be like, hey, I found this ancestor, and and like, both of my colleagues alluded to before as well, we like gifts. One of the gifts that we like at times, some of us, is tobacco, like to bring tobacco because that's sometimes how we pray, or blankets, or the different herbs that we use. And so come, with those gifts and be like, I want to know more about my community, and I do so in a humble way, right? To transition from being a person who's greatly impacted from a thinking way of colonization into a person who's detribalizing, there's going to be a lot that's hard. There's a lot of learning that you're going to engage in that's difficult. And so it's like being patient, having mercy, having grace, like continuing to sit with the elders and listen to them is all practical aspects of how do you then transition into that reconnection with your ancestors. And one that I will say is deeply essential and important and necessary for you and for all of us. You restoring that connection to your ancestors helps us, so helps our land.
Thank you all for sharing. I have to admit, I heard the word patience and I was just like, oh no. But we have another question in chat from Danny. Thank you all so much for your time and valuable information. As someone from a Mexican-American family who adheres to evangelical Christianity, it's particularly difficult to engage in my identity as a queer, non-binary person, especially in attempting to reconnect with my Yaqui Yome ancestry. First, would it even be appropriate to explore this identity as a reconnecting person, someone whose family sort of purposefully distanced themselves from our indigenous ancestry? And if so, should I frame this conversation with my family in the context of our ancestry with which I am reconnecting?
I was raised in an evangelical Pentecostal way, which is far down the rabbit hole, with my mom's side of the family, and so I totally get the things that are the things we're being told and the things we are feeling in our heart not matching up with theology and with scriptures and certain things that have been used against us for millennia to oppress us, to erase us, to remove us, and to make it okay to kill us. And so I think, some of those things we have to take ourselves away from and step back from to be able to even create a space for our mind to even wrap around what's right, what's real, nature. Indigenous people, our life ways are Mother Earth. It's nature, it's the sky, it's the land, it's the people. All of those things to working together to create this harmony. And I think, as someone who has done this work for my family, bring your family along. That's what family's for. Like when you're learning these things, learn it together. When you find something out, share it. I have a group message with a bunch of my family, and I'm always dropping in facts in there. And I'm like, hey, guess what I just found out today? I'm found out so and so and so and so was born in the Peyote Gardens in 1840, like blah blah blah. That was today. So, we're always learning different things. We're always going deeper in ourselves, and we're always kind of exposing more things as we do this process. And it's important to reconnect. It's important to accept yourself, and it's important to also take that lens off that's colonized, that Christian lens, that evangelical lens, which will tell you misinformation. The stars are always reliable. They're always in the same spot. Nature doesn't lie to you. It's predictable. We are a part of nature, so therefore our nature is not unnatural. And I think just thinking in that way will help you undo some of the harm that Christianity puts in our brains and puts in our constructs of our mind.
Yeah, I would say that your story is not an unfamiliar one to your ancestors, right? The people that were missionized, oftentimes and put into these churches that were told you have to be something else, that you can't be that here, and then most likely engaged in whatever practices they did, hidden and in secret, right? They continued those ways of being. And so I just want to say for you in particular that like you are not alone, even as it relates to your ancestors and the story that feels scary and new, difficult for you, and so that you can draw towards those ancestors on how to guide you in these particular paths. um and your sacred testimony to who we have always been and who we will always be. um and I would say in that line, I would say that God created you as you are in your particular way, and that you're meant to speak and share those things for a particular reason. The other thing that I think about a lot, being a two-spirit person myself, is a story of my uncle Orlando, who my family was raised over by Memorial on the west side. And, my uncle was a gay man. And he eventually, because things were hard for him, he moved to San Francisco, and then he contracted AIDS and passed away over there. And I, know that it was his journey, and I'm proud of him for taking that journey. But I can't tell you how many times I wish that my uncle would be here and guide me now contemporarily, which is to say that you are that uncle for your family and your people, and that you can be that Thea, or what is my partner came up with a term the other day, Thea, I don't remember what it is, but you could be that person for your community, right? Like there are people that are looking up to you and want to and need you to stand up for them and take up space for them. And I think that really those things motivate how you navigate those structures. One, that your ancestors are guiding you, they've gone through these things, and two, that you have a community that desperately needs you to take a particular space so that they're not going through some of the same things. And so I'm really, my prayers are with you. I know that at some points in your life these things would be particularly hard, but I know that much more that you're capable and you're not going to be alone in those things.
Yeah, I agree with everything they said. It's absolutely appropriate and necessary that you explore your identity and your Indigenous Native identity. And if you have to, do it under the guise in the beginning with your family, it's like, oh, I just want to know our genealogy, right? Because they're not ready to hear some things. And yeah, I mean, your audience, who you're talking to. If you've got to do it in a way that's a little, you're not really telling them exactly everything. You're just, but to get some more information, then yeah, go for it. Whatever keeps you get down that path and keeps you safe.
I remember the word, my partner uses the word titi instead of tia or tio, which is kind of cute.
It's very cute.
I've heard of titi before in Puerto Rican Taino. I've heard people say titi instead of aunt. Yeah, very common. That's cool. I would also like to add, and I know Anua touched on this earlier, but please come to our genealogy department. We also have huge online resources and other resources if you really want to go further into some archives in Mexico, things like that. If you feel like you've reached a stop, feel free to email me as well. And just ask a librarian, because there's a lot of good resources in the Texana genealogy department as well. If you're looking to take a deep dive, and if your family members can't answer certain questions, we're here to help as well.
And I will say, even if we can't find the answers, we can at least point you in the direction of potentially where to look. And just to reiterate, because this question does come up sometimes, everything at the library is free to you, like everything except printing, but otherwise everything is free to you to ask us questions, to use our computers, use our resources. It does not cost you anything. But
that kind of reminds me, I wonder if Canopy has videos on Two-Spirit people. I haven't, because when you sign up for San Antonio Public Library, you can get this app and you can watch so many videos and movies. And I've never gone to research to see if they have anything on Two-Spirit folks, but another great resource that's free with your San Antonio Public Library card.
I actually haven't used Canopy that much. Lisa, have you checked Canopy on that?
Michael, I have 20 tabs open right now.
Have you found where the music's coming from yet?
I come on. So for Canopy, I have like 6 documentaries that I have saved that I want to watch. Can I? That's like my TBR list, but it is a wonderful resource. Yeah, I'm a nonfiction person, and I'm huge. I go deep diving into archives. So yeah, I think I should work in genealogy. Maybe in the future.
They say families lie, but the blood don't.
That's true. Yeah, you just never know. And honestly, in my experience, I was just lucky to be raised by my grandmother, who was Huibrarica. And I've lived with her since I was 9 or 10. But even then, it's just like you just are. It wasn't like she talked about it like, oh, I'm this. And, it's just, it was just kind of like growing up and having that experience of her showing me, oh, your stomach hurts, let's go outside and I'm going to show you what plant, to use. And we would go into the garden and then make that recipe to help me with my stomach ache and things like that. It's those little things, those little recipes. And like Rebel said earlier, food is, a part of that. And it's healing. And so ask those questions too, ask about those recipes and things like that. So I hope that helps you in your journey.
And I will drop off that and just say that is, I feel, also the key. And I think I hope our panelists may agree. Ask questions. Ask with as much curiosity and compassion as you can put forth. There's no shame in wanting knowledge. I'm a little biased. That is literally my profession. But yeah, ask. And on a related note, we have time for one more question. And in the meantime, Otniel did ask, and this is for us, Lisa, will there be a slide with contact information on the panelists to stay connected, like a LinkedIn or a website or anything like that? And we will check, and when this is being recorded, and if there's that information that can be made available, we will go ahead and make it available if so. Are there any final questions for our panelists?
I really appreciate all of you, and it's really good to be in this place with you guys. I hope that our work, continues, that we really are diligent and intentional about working together. I think that it would do a lot for communities, and I'm gladly make myself available to any questions you have, and any ways in which you want to work together. I would look forward to those things. Also, if you want, I can put my Instagram in the chat. I don't know how you guys feel about that, for others.
Yeah. So if y'all are comfortable, you can put a way that you can be reached in the chat, and also if you're comfortable with it, we can also double that information when we make the recording available. And I just want to say, for my part, thank you all so much for coming and speaking with us and being a part of the panel. I also want to thank Lisa for including me in this program. It's been wonderful and educational and amazing. So thank you all so much for coming and speaking with us.
Yeah, I'd also like to add, I appreciate each and every one of you. I've been pretty busy this year, and I tried to reach out to you as best as I can, and just thank you for your patience and helping me put this together. Because it's what we need. We need more of these things. I'd like to eventually have something like this in person, and more events like this. So thank you so much, and I really appreciate all of you.
Yes, thank you, Lisa, Michael, and Morgan, for putting this together. Thank you to my fellow panelists. It's such a joy sharing the space with y'all and hearing your answers to the questions. And I have gotten a lot of animo, a lot of energy from this plática, and I really appreciate it. So thank you, Lisa, for this vision. Thank you to all the attendees that listened to us and asked us questions. And thank y'all for recording this so we can share it to other folks who weren't able to be here today.
All right. Thank you, everyone. I do hope you have a great rest of your afternoon. I appreciate y'all attending the program. You have a good rest of your day, and keep your eye out. We will definitely be having more things like this.
Thank you. Pamparotti.
Nakalets.